Welcome back to another episode of Boring History for Sleep, where we bring you the most snooze-worthy tales from across the centuries. In today's video, we're going to find out why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times. We'll uncover the gruesome ways people met their demise during the plague and learn about one very naughty king. If you're new here, don't forget to stay tuned for more historical tales each and every week. Let us know your thoughts on today's video in the comments below, and be sure to like it if you found it interesting. Why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times. The Middle Ages were full of all sorts of creepy crawlies, and medieval life expectancy was around 35 years old. But how did people die, and what were the leading causes of death back then? Here are 5 reasons you wouldn't make it to the end of the day in medieval times. No. 5. The Black Death, also known as the plague or bubonic plague. This was a horrible disease that killed millions of people throughout Europe. It is believed that over 25 million people died from the plague in the 14th century alone. That's around 60% of Europe's population. This deadly disease spread through fleas that lived on rats and was particularly prevalent in dirty towns and cities, where waste and sewage was undisposed of properly. If you did get ill with the plague, well, you probably wouldn't survive. Symptoms included fever, chills, weakness, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. And those who did succumb to the illness quickly found themselves covered in painful swellings known as buboes. These would appear in the groin, armpits, or neck, and could grow to be the size of an apple. Being poor, the only treatment available to you would have been to have them lanced open and the foul matter inside being squeezed out. However, even this painful procedure rarely helped, and most people that contracted the plague died within a week of the buboes appearing. Rich folk could afford to leave town and avoid infection, or they might try unproven cures such as drinking vinegar or applying leeches to their skin. But the plague was so widespread, so deadly, and so horrible that you simply couldn't escape its grasp. Number 4. A medieval street fight. Life in medieval times was tough, and people often found themselves getting into scuffles and fights. Something we've seen depicted in films such as Monty Python and Holy Grail. Once a fight broke out, it could turn violent very quickly, and there were no rules. So it was basically every man for himself. Punches and kicks were thrown freely, and sometimes heads were taken off. During a street fight, anything could happen, and you had little to no chance of defending yourself against an opponent, because weapons were used at the drop of a hat. Swords, clubs, knives, and axes were common weapons, and one wrong move would result in your head being separated from your body in one swift movement. Even if you weren't involved in a fight, you still ran the risk of being caught up in one. Fights often broke out in taverns and could easily spill out onto the streets. A stray sword or arrow could take your head off, even if you were trying to mind your own business. There were also public executions, which could turn violent if the condemned fought back against their executioners or riled up the crowd so much that they became violent and unruly. During these executions, all sorts of weapons were used to kill the criminals, including swords, spears, gallows, and burning. So perhaps it's best to stay clear of any public gatherings if you want to make it to the end of the day. No. 3. An angry king. Medieval kings may have seemed like godlike figures to their subjects, but they were only human, and sometimes they had really bad tempers. In 1483, Edward IV of England died unexpectedly, leaving the throne to his younger brother Richard. But before ascending to the throne, Richard had to deal with his nephew, the young Prince Edward, who was the son of Edward IV and his first wife, Elizabeth Woodville. The young prince's mother thought that her son should become king instead of Richard, and so she fled to France with him to seek help from their allies. Richard was furious with his sister and her husband, the French king, Louis XI, for betraying him, and he went to war to punish them. Sadly, the young Prince Edward was caught in the crossfire and died of wounds sustained during the battle. Although it wasn't Richard's intention to kill his nephew, he still held his sister responsible. When Elizabeth Woodville heard about the death of her son, she went to see Richard to demand that he return the body so they could bury him properly. But when she arrived at his court, Richard refused and told her that the body would only be returned to her if she agreed to marry him. Horrified, she refused and he threw her in prison. She was forced to watch the funeral procession of her son go by her window, all the while knowing that her son's body had been desecrated. Her nephew's death had been avenged, and now Richard was free to take the throne. No to being a witch. Throughout history, many people have been accused of witchcraft, and the same was true in medieval times. It was believed that witches could cause harm to others through the use of magic and spells, and they were often associated with the devil. This meant that if you were accused of being a witch, you were in serious trouble. The Salem witch trials in the United States are perhaps the most famous cases of accusations of witchcraft, although they didn't actually take place during the Middle Ages. Nevertheless, during the Middle Ages, anyone accused of witchcraft was in danger of being put to death. Accusations could come out of nowhere, and there was no real evidence needed to have someone arrested for practicing witchcraft. Sometimes, people were accused just out of jealousy or spite. If someone wanted something that you had, they could accuse you of using witchcraft to acquire it, and it would be hard to prove that you didn't do it. It wasn't uncommon for people to confess to witchcraft under torture. After all, if they didn't confess, they risked being killed anyway. So it was better to admit to the crime and hope for a lighter sentence, even though that usually meant admitting to crimes that you didn't commit. Those convicted of witchcraft faced execution by hanging, burning, or drowning. So it was important to stay on the right side of the law and not make too many enemies. No. 1. Childbirth. Giving birth was, and still is, a dangerous activity. The chances of dying during childbirth were high in medieval times, especially if you were poor and couldn't afford good medical care. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death among women, and it was common for mothers to die shortly after giving birth. The process of labor was long and difficult, and there were many things that could go wrong. If the baby was positioned incorrectly, or if there were complications during delivery, it could be fatal for both the mother and the child. The risk of infection was also high, and this could lead to a fever or other illnesses that would eventually kill the mother. If you were wealthy, you could afford skilled midwives to help you deliver your babies and perhaps increase your odds of survival. But for poor women, they were often left to fend for themselves, giving birth alone or with the help of family members. So if you were a woman living in medieval times, your chances of dying during childbirth were pretty high. Bonus fact: don't eat that apple. In medieval times, people sometimes bit off more than they could chew. Quite literally. Back then, people would eat apples whole and without removing the seeds inside. They either didn't know that the seeds inside apples were poisonous, or didn't care. Seeds contain a chemical called amygdalin, which can be lethal if eaten. The seeds need to be crushed for the toxin to be released, and when they're inside the apple, they're safe to eat. People who ate the seeds were likely unaware that the cyanide inside could kill them, and if they ate enough seeds, they could have easily passed away. Well, that's all for this episode of Boring History for Sleep. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed learning about why you wouldn't last a day in medieval times. Do you think you would have survived? Let us know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more content.